Okay. Dr. Andrew Dessler, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
So I'm a professor in the Department of Atmospheric Sciences at Texas A&M University, and I study climate and climate feedbacks and how water vapor and clouds influence climate.
Now, tell me a little bit about the reception that you've been getting going around, given climate change in the context of what most people would consider a liberal perspective.
Yeah, I think that the reception I get is generally favorable. There's a lot of research has been done on people and cognitive biases. And what it turns out is that most people who don't believe in climate change just don't go out and hear talks from, climate scientists, because they sort of know in advance they're not going to hear what they want to. So in general, the audiences are very friendly, and the reception I get is very friendly.
Now, in as much as the audience is friendly, I think we both agree that we would rather have an unfriendly audience, because if we have a friendly audience, we're probably preaching to the choir.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Now, what would you suggest that we do to get this message across and show the importance that it actually has, not to just one section of the community, but the entire country or world as a whole?
Well, that's really a hard question, and there are a lot of people that are trying to think of different ways, new media, different strategies for getting the message out there. And, the basic problem is that the debate has changed. So 5 years ago, you actually could have a legitimate debate about climate change. John McCain, the presidential candidate for the Republicans, he accepted the science of climate change. Newt Gingrich accepted the science of climate change. Mitt Romney accepted the science of climate change. Just about everybody who was smart was looking at the problem thoroughly, recognized how solid the science was. But what's happened now is it's really changed, and now if you tell people the science of climate change, you run the risk of offending them. And it's hard to get across a message when people are so quick to dismiss the science. I don't know that I have a really good answer for that, other than to say that I do think things like the heat wave that we had in Texas in 2011, I think that very likely things like that might be what's required to change people's minds.
In other words, when it actually affects them directly, immediately.
That's right. It's when it's no longer the theoretical threat, but it's an you're actually sweating, then you're a little quicker to accept, or you're sweating, or you get a $700 electricity bill because you're trying to keep your house at a reasonable temperature.
But then at that point, isn't it too late?
Well, it's never too late. You can always head off future effects. So, we've passed the point where we can avoid all climate change, but we still have time to avoid sort of the worst case scenario that could happen towards the end of the 21st century. And so I think it's never too late, but the longer you wait, the less climate change you can avoid, the more painful it's going to be to take action, and it's just sort of going to be more miserable, more expensive the longer you wait.
How do you describe that scenario that you just spoke about?
Worst case scenario.
Worst case scenario.
Right. Well, okay, so a good analogy is you're in your car, and the car ahead of you slams on its brakes, and you immediately realize you're not going to be able to avoid a collision. So what do? Well, you might do nothing and just hit the car ahead of you as fast as you can. The alternative is you can slam on the brakes and try to stop and avoid the collision, avoid as much damage as possible. I think that's the situation we're in. We can't avoid all climate change, but we still have control. We still have the opportunity to avoid the worst warming second half of the 21st century.
Now, if you were to tell our audience what they can actually do to influence, take some of what you've been teaching us out here today, what can the average citizen go out there and do to actually make a difference?
All right, well, there are sort of two categories of things. Right? So the first thing is you can take sort of personal actions to reduce your carbon footprint. Things like combining trips, maybe walking to a friend's house a mile away instead of driving, dietary changes that might reduce your carbon footprint. And these are things that not only will reduce climate change, but also they'll be good for you. You'll lose some weight. You'll be healthier. And so these are things that everyone should be doing. They'll save money. They'll be happier. But the problem is that individual action like that is not going to solve the problem. We need coordinated society-wide action. And the only way to do that is by ensuring that politicians who support action are elected. So if you care about stabilizing the climate, you have to take action in voting booths. That's the only way to really solve it. So individual actions, great, you should do them. You'll be better off. But ultimately, it's political action and making sure that people who believe in controlling the climate are elected. And if you care about the climate, that's what you have to do.
Now, recently, many investors on the right side of our political spectrum has been placing a whole lot of funds at universities, investing in a lot of research departments in universities. A lot of us believe to actually get outcomes that are not necessarily scientific outcomes, if you will. First of all, do you find that at the university that you are at, or is this something that you're also aware of?
I have heard of that, but not at Texas A&M and not in any of the departments that I deal with. I think that's still quite rare. Universities are really sort of fiercely independent, and no reputable university would want to put its reputation on the line by even seeming to have that kind of conflict. So I'm not terribly worried about that, but obviously you always have to be vigilant about those kinds of things.
Don't you see, as part of the solution of solving our current climate change dilemma, if you will, that we can actually make an economic positive out of this particular issue?
Yeah, well, a lot of economists have looked at the problem of climate change. I think there's certainly the case that some policies will be net beneficial to the economy, that we will be able to avoid the cost of climate change for a cost that's lower than what the impacts would have cost us. And so I do think that there are ways to actually come out and be better off and be happier.
No, and as much as the energy density of, let's say, gasoline or all the fossil fuels is pretty high, don't you think having a whole lot of people make windmills and solar cells and so forth is expansive to the economy?
Yeah, no, I think that there are ways that we can reduce our carbon footprint, reduce climate change, and come out better off. I mean, the idea that right now any switch to renewables is going to be bad for our economy doesn't really make any sense. I mean, our economy is not optimum and perfectly balanced. And I think that, given the costs, the externalities of the cost of fossil fuels, it's pretty clear that some switch to renewables will in the long run save some money. And then the question is how stringently do you reduce your emissions and over what time scale? That's really the question. Not should you do it, but how aggressively and how fast and what policies do you use and things like that.